The rain came down hard that evening, thick, heavy drops that turned the winding road up the hill into a slick, glistening ribbon. Trees bowed under the weight of the storm, their leaves trembling as water rushed down the slopes and pooled near the tall iron gates of the mansion perched at the top. Inside the car, the man behind the wheel barely noticed. His mind was still tangled in numbers, voices from the boardroom, the sharp scent of expensive cologne mixing with the damp leather of the seats. He'd just wrapped up a tense meeting. Another merger, another set of decisions that would ripple through thousands of lives he'd never meet. He wasn't used to silence anymore. Even when alone, his thoughts roared like engines. But tonight, for once, he wanted quiet. He wanted to step into his home, pour a glass of something dark and smooth, and forget the world for a few hours. The security guard at the gate recognized the car instantly and pressed the button to open the gates without hesitation. But just as the metal bars began to slide apart, something moved in the shadows near the stone pillar. At first, he thought it was a stray dog, small, hunched, soaked through. But then it stood, a child, barefoot, drenched. Her clothes clung to her thin frame like rags, and her hair, long and tangled, was plastered to her cheeks. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. One hand gripped the strap of a worn-out school bag. The other hung limply at her side. She didn't run. She didn't beg. She just stood there shivering, eyes fixed on the car as it rolled to a stop a few feet away. The billionaire frowned. His security team had strict orders, no loiterers, no exceptions. He tapped his driver's shoulder. "Why is she here?" Before the driver could answer, the girl took a step forward. Rainwater dripped from her chin. Her lips moved, but the sound was lost in the drumming of the storm, until she tried again, louder this time, voice cracking like dry twigs. "Papa?" The word hit him like a punch to the chest. He hadn't heard that word directed at him in years, not from a stranger, certainly not from a child standing in the mud outside his fortress of glass and steel. He blinked, certain he'd misheard. But there it was again, softer now, almost pleading. "Papa?" His hands tightened on his knees. Every instinct told him to roll up the window, drive through the gate, let security handle it. This wasn't his problem. He had lawyers, assistants, protocols for situations like this. But something in her eyes, wide, dark, and impossibly familiar, stopped him cold. "Wait," he said, voice low. He opened the car door himself, ignoring the driver's quiet protest. Rain soaked his tailored coat in seconds, but he barely felt it. He walked toward her slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. Up close, he saw the chapped skin on her knuckles, the dirt under her nails, the way her ribs pressed faintly against her thin shirt. She didn't flinch when he crouched down to her level. "Who are you?" he asked, not unkindly, but with the careful distance of a man used to controlling every conversation. She swallowed hard. "Mira," she whispered. Then after a pause, "Your daughter." He almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, but out of sheer disbelief. He had no daughter. He had a wife, a legacy, a name that opened doors across continents, but no child. "Not that he knew of. You're mistaken," he said gently. "I don't have a daughter." But she didn't look away. Instead, she reached into her school bag with trembling fingers and pulled out a small, water-stained photograph. It was old, edges curled, colors faded, but unmistakable. It showed a younger version of him, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and a simple cotton sari, both smiling in front of a modest apartment building he hadn't visited in over 2 decades. His breath caught. That woman. Priya. He hadn't thought of her name in years. Not since the day he'd walked away, promising himself it was for the best, for his future, for his family's reputation, for the empire he was building brick by brick. He'd sent money once, anonymously, through a lawyer. He'd told himself that was enough, that she understood, that she'd moved on. But here was proof she hadn't. And here was her child, his child, standing in the rain calling him Papa. Behind him, the security chief jogged over, radio in hand. "Sir, we'll take care of this. Please go inside. It's not safe." The billionaire didn't move. He looked at Mira, really looked. Saw the way her lower lip trembled, not from cold, but from fear of being turned away. Saw the quiet dignity in her posture even now, even here. "No," he said, standing up. "She's coming in." The security chief blinked. "Sir, protocol." "Screw protocol," he snapped, then immediately softened his tone when he saw Mira flinch. He turned back to her. "You're coming inside. You're safe now." She didn't smile, didn't cry, just nodded once as if she'd been holding her breath for weeks and could finally let it go. Inside the mansion, warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, abstract art worth more than most people's lifetime earnings, but none of it mattered in that moment. He called for dry clothes, hot milk, a blanket, ordered the staff not to stare, led her to a quiet sitting room away from the main hall, where the only sounds were the crackling fireplace and the distant patter of rain. She sat on the edge of the velvet couch, clutching the blanket like a lifeline, eyes darting around but never landing on him for too long. He sat across from her, not too close, giving her space. "Tell me everything," he said, and so she did. Her voice was soft but steady. She spoke of a tiny room in a crowded neighborhood where laundry lines crisscrossed the sky and the smell of spices filled the air. Of a mother who worked 12-hour days cleaning offices, then came home to help her with homework by candlelight when the electricity was cut off. Of stories her mother told, about a kind man who once gave her hope, who promised to come back, who vanished just as her belly began to swell. "She never blamed you," Mira said, staring into her cup of milk. "She said you had your own life, your own path. But when she got sick, she made me promise." "Promise what?" "To find you. To tell you. She never stopped believing you were good." He looked away, throat tight. He'd built empires, signed billion-dollar deals, stood on stages with world leaders, but right now, in this quiet room with a child who carried his blood and his regrets, he felt smaller than he ever had. "Why now?" he asked. "Mama passed away 2 months ago," she said simply. There was no one else. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. He wanted to say something grand, something to fix it all, to undo the years of absence, to make up for every missed birthday, every night she'd gone to bed hungry while he dined on truffle pasta in 5-star hotels. But no words felt big enough. So instead, he did the only thing he could. He reached out and gently took her small, cold hand in his. "You won't be alone again," he said. "I promise." She didn't say thank you, didn't throw her arms around him, but she let her fingers curl slightly around his, just enough to show she believed him, for now. Later, after she'd fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped in the blanket with her school bag tucked under her arm like a shield, he stood in the hallway staring at her through the half-open door. His phone buzzed, his wife, his assistant, his head of security, all demanding updates. He silenced them all. For the first time in years, he didn't think about stock prices or market shares. He thought about a woman named Priya, who'd loved him quietly and raised his child in silence. He thought about the girl sleeping just feet away, who'd walked miles in the rain just to say one word, "Papa." And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. Outside, the storm began to ease. The rain softened to a whisper. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called. Inside the mansion, a man who had everything finally understood what he'd been missing all along. Not a legacy of wealth, but a child who needed him to be more than a name on a building. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair by the fire, watching over her, making silent promises he intended to keep. Because sometimes the most important moments in life don't arrive with fanfare or headlines. Sometimes they show up soaked and shivering at your gate, asking for nothing more than a chance to belong. The morning light crept through the tall windows, soft and golden, painting stripes across the polished floor. The mansion, usually so quiet at dawn, held a different kind of silence now. One filled with the slow, steady breathing of a child asleep on the couch. He hadn't moved from his chair all night. His back ached, his eyes burned, but he didn't care. Every time he'd glanced over and seen her curled under the blanket, one arm wrapped around that battered school bag like it was the only thing left in the world that belonged to her, something inside him twisted, not with regret alone, but with a strange, aching tenderness he hadn't felt in decades. When she finally stirred, blinking against the light, he was already on his feet. She sat up quickly, eyes wide with that same wariness from the night before, as if expecting to be told it was all a mistake and she needed to leave. "You're safe," he said gently, before she could speak. "You can stay as long as you need." She nodded slowly, then looked down at her damp clothes, now dry but wrinkled and stained. He called for fresh clothes, simple cotton pants and a soft sweater, nothing fancy, and waited outside while she changed. When she came out, she looked smaller somehow, swallowed by the new clothes, but cleaner, calmer. They sat at the kitchen table, just the two of them. A housekeeper had left warm paratha, yogurt, and fruit, then quietly disappeared. He watched as the girl ate slowly, carefully, as if she wasn't used to having enough. He didn't ask questions at first. He just let her eat. Let the quiet settle between them like a blanket. But after a while, she set her spoon down and looked at him. "Mama used to talk about you," she said, voice low. "Not often. Only on quiet nights when she thought I was asleep." He didn't move. "What did she say?" "She said you were kind. That you used to bring her tea when she worked late. That you listened when no one else did." She paused, picking at the edge of her plate. "She said you had big dreams, and that she didn't want to hold you back." His chest tightened. He remembered those nights, the late hours in his small city apartment, the weight of ambition pressing down on him, and her, always there, sweeping floors or folding laundry, but with a quiet strength in her eyes that made him pause. He'd been young then, hungry for success, convinced that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. So he'd let her go. Sent money once through a lawyer with a note that said, "For your future." He never knew if she got it. Never asked. Her name was Priya, he said softly. Mira nodded. "She kept your photo, the one from the apartment building. Said it was the only time she saw you truly happy." He swallowed hard. That photo had been taken on a rare Sunday off. He'd been laughing at something she'd said, something silly probably. But in that moment, he hadn't been thinking about deals or deadlines. He'd just been himself. "What happened to her?" he asked, though he already feared the answer. Mira looked out the window toward the hills still glistening from last night's rain. "She got sick last year. Cough that wouldn't go away. We went to the clinic, but they said it was serious. Needed medicine we couldn't afford." She spoke without anger, just quiet sadness. She worked until she couldn't stand. Even then, she cleaned houses on her hands and knees. Said we had to eat. He closed his eyes. He could picture it. The pride, the exhaustion, the sheer will to survive. And he hadn't been there. Not once. When she knew she wouldn't get better, Mira continued, "She made me memorize your address. Told me to wait until after she was gone. Said you'd help me. Said you'd understand. Why didn't she reach out sooner?" he asked, voice rough. "She didn't want to be a burden. And she said you had a life now. A wife, a name. She didn't want to ruin it." He stared at his hands. His life felt suddenly hollow. Polished surfaces, empty rooms, conversations that never went deeper than profit margins. All this time while he'd been building towers, she'd been fighting just to keep a roof over her daughter's head. "I didn't know," he said, and for the first time it sounded like an apology instead of an excuse. Mira didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached into her school bag again and pulled out a small notebook, its cover worn thin. She opened it carefully and handed him a folded piece of paper. It was a birth certificate, her name, her mother's name, and in the father's section, blank. But tucked inside the fold was another paper yellowed with age. A letter. He unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was neat, careful, the ink slightly smudged in places. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Mira has found you. Please don't be angry with her. She's a good girl, smart, brave, and kind like you once were. I never told you about her because I saw how hard you were chasing your dream. I didn't want to chain you to a life you didn't choose. But she deserves to know where she comes from. She deserves a father who sees her. If you can't be that man, I understand. But if you can, please give her a chance. She's all I have to leave behind." The letter ended there. No signature. Just a single teardrop stain near the bottom. He couldn't speak. He folded the letter slowly, pressed it to his chest like it might burn through his skin. When he looked up, Mira was watching him, not with expectation, but with a quiet hope that broke his heart all over again. "I don't expect anything," she said softly. "I just didn't want to be alone." "You're not alone," he said. And this time he meant it with everything in him. Later that day, he called his personal physician, a discreet man who'd handled everything from broken bones to nervous breakdowns for his family over the years. "I need a DNA test," he said. "Private, fast, no records beyond us." The doctor didn't ask why. He just said, "I'll be there in an hour." While they waited, he showed Mira around the house, not the grand tour, just the basics. Her room, already prepared by the staff. Soft bed, books on the shelf, a window that looked out over the garden. She stood in the doorway, hesitant. "It's too much," she whispered. "It's yours," he said. "You don't have to earn it." She stepped inside slowly, running her fingers over the quilt, the smooth wood of the desk. Then she turned to him, eyes shining. "Can I keep my school bag here?" "Of course." She placed it gently on the chair like it was sacred. That afternoon the doctor arrived. He took a simple cheek swab from both of them. Quick, painless. Mira didn't flinch. She watched everything with quiet curiosity, as if she'd spent her whole life observing adults to survive. After the doctor left, the billionaire sat with Mira in the garden. The rain had washed everything clean. Birds chirped. The air smelled of wet earth and jasmine. "Do you like school?" he asked. She nodded. "I missed the last 2 weeks. After Mama. I had to take care of things." "What things?" "Bills, talking to the landlord, selling what we could." She said it matter-of-factly, like it was normal for a 10-year-old to handle adult worries. "But I kept my books. I read every night." He felt a surge of pride and guilt. She was bright, determined, and she'd been fighting battles no child should ever face. "I'll enroll you in a good school," he said. "Starting next week." She looked at him, surprised. "You'd do that?" "I'd do a lot more than that," he said. That evening his wife returned. She'd been away at their coastal home dealing with family matters. She walked in elegant as always, heels clicking on the marble, but stopped short when she saw Mira sitting at the dining table, carefully writing in a notebook with a new pen he'd given her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then his wife turned to him, eyes sharp, voice calm but edged with something deeper. "Who is this?" He stepped forward. "This is Mira. She's my daughter." The words hung in the air like smoke. His wife didn't shout, didn't cry. She just looked at Mira, really looked, and then back at him. "Is that true?" "I don't know for sure yet," he admitted. "We're waiting on a test, but I believe it." She walked closer, studying Mira's face, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw. Then quietly she said, "She looks like your mother." He hadn't noticed it before, but now he saw it too. The same gentle slope of the brow, the same quiet intensity in the gaze. His wife pulled out a chair and sat across from Mira. "What's your favorite subject in school?" Mira blinked, startled by the kindness. "Math," she said. "Numbers make sense. They don't lie." A small smile touched his wife's lips. "I liked math too." They talked for a while, about school, about books, about the garden. Mira slowly began to relax. She even smiled once, a small shy thing that lit up her whole face. Later, when Mira went to bed, his wife confronted him in the study. "Do you remember Priya?" she asked, arms crossed. He nodded. "From years ago, before we married, and you never told me." "I didn't think it mattered," he said honestly. "It was over before it really began." "But it wasn't over for her, was it?" His wife's voice was quiet, not angry, just sad. "She raised your child alone. While we lived like kings, he had no defense. I didn't know. Maybe not. But you know now." She looked at him, eyes searching. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to be her father," he said without hesitation. "If she'll let me." His wife was silent for a long time. Then she sighed. "I won't pretend this isn't hard. But that girl didn't ask for any of this. She just showed up scared and alone and called you Papa." She paused. "If she's yours, then she's ours. But you have to be sure. And you have to be all in. No half measures," he nodded. "I will be." The next morning, the test results came. Positive. 99.9% certainty. He read the report 3 times, then sat in his office, staring out at the city below. All his life he'd measured success in assets, acquisitions, influence. But now the only number that mattered was that one, 99.9%. He found Mira in the garden again, feeding crumbs to sparrows. He knelt beside her. "The test came back," he said gently. "You are my daughter." She didn't cry, didn't jump up and hug him. She just looked at him, eyes wide, and whispered, "Really?" "Really," he said, voice thick. "And I'm so sorry it took me so long to find you." She reached out then, tentatively, and touched his hand. Not to ask for anything, just to make sure he was real. That night, for the first time in years, he didn't sleep in his master suite. He pulled a chair into Mira's room and sat by the door, listening to her breathe, watching the moonlight trace patterns on the wall. He thought about Priya. her strength, her silence, her love that asked for nothing in return. He thought about the years lost, the birthdays missed, the lullabies never sung. But he also thought about tomorrow. About school enrollment forms, about bedtime stories, about teaching her to ride a bike in the driveway. He wasn't just a billionaire anymore, he was a father. And this time, he wouldn't walk away. The days that followed settled into a strange kind of rhythm. Quiet, careful. Full of unspoken questions and small gestures that meant more than words ever could. Mira began to move through the house like she belonged there, though she still tiptoed past expensive vases and flinched when a door slammed too loudly. She kept her room neat, made her bed every morning, and never asked for anything beyond what was offered. But she watched. Always watching. Not with suspicion, but with the sharp eyes of someone who'd learned early that the world wasn't kind to those without power. He, in turn, tried to be present. He canceled meetings, skipped dinners with investors, sat with her at breakfast, even if he only sipped black coffee while she ate. He asked about her dreams, what she wanted to be when she grew up. "A teacher," she said once, stirring her milk slowly, "so I can help kids like me." He didn't tell her she could be anything, a doctor, a scientist, even run his company one day. He just nodded and said, "That's a good dream." But beneath the calm surface, tension was building. The outside world hadn't forgotten him. And it certainly hadn't missed the sudden appearance of a child at his side. It started with a photo. A paparazzo, perched on a hill across the valley, had snapped a shot through the trees. Him walking Mira through the garden, her small hand tucked into his. The caption read, "Billionaire's secret daughter, mystery girl spotted at private estate." Within hours, the story exploded. News channels replayed old interviews where he'd declared, "Family is my greatest asset," while showing footage of his wife at charity galas, never once mentioning a child. Social media lit up with speculation. Was this a scam? A long-lost heir? A PR stunt? Bloggers dug up old records trying to link him to any woman named Priya. One tabloid even published a blurry image of the slum where Mira had lived, calling it the truth behind the fairy tale. He tried to shield her, kept the TVs off, blocked news alerts on his phone. But kids at the private school he'd enrolled her in, though she hadn't started yet, were already whispering. A driver's son mentioned it at the gate. "People are saying you're not really his daughter," the boy had said, not unkindly, just curious. Mira came to him that evening, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Do they think I'm lying?" He knelt, cupping her face in his hands. "Let them talk. You know the truth. I know the truth. That's all that matters." But it wasn't just strangers. His inner circle was fracturing. His board of directors called an emergency meeting. Not in the usual glass conference room, but in hushed voices over encrypted lines. "This is a liability," one investor said bluntly. "Your image is stability, tradition, family values. But this? It looks messy. Unplanned. People will question your judgment." Another added, "If she's legitimate, fine, but you need to handle it quietly. A trust fund, a new identity. Send her abroad to school. Keep her out of the spotlight." He listened in silence. Then he said, "She's not a problem to be managed. She's my daughter." A pause. Then colder. "Then perhaps you're no longer the right person to lead this company." The words landed like stones. He'd built this empire with his own hands. Sacrificed sleep, relationships, even pieces of his soul. And now they were threatening to take it all because he'd chosen to love a child who needed him? At home, his wife sat with him late one night, both of them wrapped in shawls on the terrace, the city lights glittering below like scattered stars. "They're scared," she said softly. "Not of her. Of change. Of losing control." "I won't hide her," he said. "I know." She reached for his hand. "But are you ready for what comes next? If you stand by her publicly, it won't just be gossip. It'll be lawsuits, investigations, maybe even challenges to your will. People will dig into your past like vultures." He looked toward Mira's window. A soft light still glowed inside. I spent my whole life building a name people respect. But what good is respect if I'm not worthy of it? His wife was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Then do it right. Not as a billionaire, as a father." The next morning, he made a decision. He called his head of communications, not the polished PR executive who handled product launches, but the older man who'd been with him since the early days, who knew his mistakes and his heart. "I want to tell the truth," he said. "All of it." The man didn't flinch. "It'll be brutal. Let it be." They spent 2 days preparing. Not a flashy press release, not a staged photo op. Just a simple statement, written in plain words and a short video he recorded in his study. No suit, no backdrop, just him, sitting in the same chair where he'd first held Mira's hand. In the video, he spoke slowly, looking straight into the camera. "A few weeks ago, a young girl came to my home. She was alone, scared, and carrying nothing but a photograph and a promise from her mother. Her name is Mira, and she is my daughter." He didn't hide behind legalese. He admitted his past, his relationship with her mother, his failure to know about her existence, his regret. He spoke of Priya with respect, calling her a woman of quiet strength who raised her child with love, despite everything. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he simply said, "I am choosing to be the father she deserves now." And then the most important part, "From this day forward, a portion of my company's profits will fund a foundation in Priya's name, supporting single mothers, children's education and healthcare in underserved communities, because no child should have to walk miles in the rain just to find their father." He didn't show Mira in the video. He refused to make her a spectacle, but he made it clear she was part of his family, not a secret, not a scandal, a daughter. The video went live at 9 a.m. Within an hour, the internet erupted, not just with criticism, but with something unexpected: support. Women shared stories of raising children alone. Men confessed regrets of walking away from responsibilities. Teachers, nurses, drivers, ordinary people wrote, "Finally, someone with power doing the right thing." Of course, the backlash came too. Critics called it a publicity stunt. Rivals whispered about instability. A few shareholders sold off stock. But something else happened too. Applications to his company's internship program tripled overnight. Donations poured into the newly announced foundation before it even had a website. And at the school gates, parents who'd once looked at Mira with suspicion now smiled and said, "Welcome." At home, Mira watched the video with him curled up on the couch. "Was that scary?" she asked afterward. "A little," he admitted. "But you did it anyway. Because you're worth it." She leaned her head against his shoulder, then, just for a moment, and he held his breath, afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. Later that week, he took her to visit the slum where she'd lived. He didn't go in a limousine. Just a plain car, no security, no fanfare. He wanted her to see it not as a place of shame, but as part of her story. The narrow lanes were crowded, the air thick with the smell of cooking oil and wet concrete. Children played barefoot in puddles. Women hung laundry from windows. When they saw Mira, some stared. Others waved. An old woman sweeping her doorstep called out, "Mira, you came back." Mira ran to her, hugging her tightly. "Auntie, this is my papa." The woman looked at him, eyes sharp but not unkind. "So you finally found her?" "I did," he said simply. She nodded, as if that was enough. He walked with Mira to her old room, a single space no bigger than a closet, with a cracked window and a thin mattress on the floor. She stood in the doorway, silent. "You don't have to stay," he said gently. "I know," she said. "But I wanted to say goodbye." She picked up a small stone from the windowsill, smooth, gray, with a white stripe. "Mama gave me this, said it was lucky." She slipped it into her pocket. As they walked back, a group of children followed at a distance, curious. One boy called out, "Mira, are you rich now?" She stopped, turned, and smiled. "I have a home, and food, and someone who cares. That's enough." The boy nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Back in the car, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Will you really build a school here?" "Yes," he said, "with your help. You'll help decide what it looks like." She thought about that. It should have big windows so the sun can come in, and a library and a place to play chess. He smiled. "Chess?" "You taught me last week," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He had. One rainy afternoon, he'd pulled out an old wooden set from his study. She'd watched him move the pieces, fascinated. "Why does the king move so slow?" she'd asked. "Because even kings need protection," he'd said. "And sometimes, the smallest piece, the pawn, can become the most powerful." She'd won their third game. He hadn't let her. She'd outmaneuvered him with a quiet focus that reminded him of her mother. Now, driving through the city, he realized something. He wasn't just giving her a better life. She was giving him one too. A life with meaning beyond balance sheets. A life where love wasn't a weakness but the strongest foundation of all. That night, over dinner, his wife said, "You've changed." He looked at Mira, who was carefully cutting her vegetables into neat pieces. "I think I'm just becoming who I was supposed to be." His wife reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "It suits you." Later, as he tucked Mira into bed, she asked, "Do you think Mama saw the video?" He sat on the edge of her bed. "I hope so." "She'd be proud," Mira whispered. He kissed her forehead. "So am I." And for the first time in years, he meant it, not just about her, but about himself. The storm outside had passed. The world was still watching, still judging, still waiting for him to fail. But in that quiet room with H, his daughter breathing softly in the dark, he knew he'd already won, not because he'd kept his empire, but because he'd finally chosen what truly mattered. And that was a victory no stock price could measure. Life didn't magically fix itself overnight. Even with truth spoken and promises made, the days that followed were messy, uncertain, and full of small battles no one saw on the news. The press didn't vanish. Reporters still lingered near the estate gates, hoping for a photo of Mira walking to school or playing in the garden. Online, debates raged, some calling him a hero, others a fool who'd let sentiment ruin sound business judgment. But inside the house, something quieter and more important was growing. Trust. Mira started school that Monday, not with a chauffeur or a bodyguard, but with him walking her to the gate just like any other parent might. She wore a crisp uniform, her hair neatly braided, and clutched a new backpack that she'd picked out herself, a deep blue one with a tiny embroidered star on the side. She didn't look back once as she stepped through the school doors. He stood there a moment longer, watching until she disappeared into the crowd of children, then turned and walked back alone, heart full in a way he couldn't explain. At first, the other kids didn't know what to make of her. Some whispered, others stared. But Mira didn't try to impress anyone. She sat quietly in class, raised her hand only when she knew the answer, and during lunch she shared her fruit with a boy who'd forgotten his tiffin. By the end of the week, she had 2 friends. By the end of the month, she was helping the teacher organize the classroom library. He made it a point to be home by 6 every evening. No more late-night calls from New York or Tokyo. He'd sit at the kitchen table while she did her homework, sipping tea and pretending to read the newspaper, though his eyes kept drifting to her, watching the way her brow furrowed when she solved a tough math problem, or how she'd hum softly when she wrote stories in her notebook. One evening, she looked up from her book and asked, "Do you think I'll ever be as smart as you?" He set his cup down. "I don't know if I'm smart," he said honestly. "I just worked hard, but you? You've got something I never did, kindness. And that's rarer than any degree." She smiled just a little and went back to her work. Meanwhile, the foundation in Priya's name began to take shape. He didn't hand it off to a team of consultants. He involved Mira from the start. They sat together on weekends looking at photos of community centers, reading letters from mothers who'd heard about the project. She'd point to a photo of a crumbling school and say, "This one needs help most." Or she'd suggest, "What if we give books, not just money?" He listened, and he acted. The first project was a health clinic in the neighborhood where Mira had lived. Not a grand building, but a clean, bright space with trained nurses, medicine, and a small room where mothers could rest while their children were treated. On opening day, he didn't give a speech. Mira did. Standing on a small wooden stool so everyone could see her, she spoke in a clear, steady voice. My mama got sick because there was no place like this. I don't want that to happen to anyone else. The crowd, mostly women in faded saris and worn slippers, clapped not out of politeness but with tears in their eyes. One woman reached out and touched Mira's hand as she stepped down. Your mother is smiling in heaven, she whispered. That night over dinner, his wife said, You've given her a voice. She had one all along, he replied. I just finally learned to listen, but not everything was smooth. There were still moments of doubt, his own and others. One afternoon, a man showed up at the estate gate claiming to be Priya's cousin. He demanded money, saying he'd protected Mira after her mother died. Security turned him away, but the incident shook Mira. That night, she couldn't sleep. She came to his study barefoot, eyes wide with fear. What if more people come? She asked. What if they say bad things about Mama? He knelt and held her shoulders. No one can take away who your mother was. She was brave, loving, honest, and nothing anyone says will change that. But what if they don't believe us? Then we keep showing them the truth, with our actions, not our words. He arranged for a trusted lawyer to quietly verify the man's claims. It turned out he'd never even met Priya, just saw an opportunity. The whole thing was handled without drama, without headlines. But it reminded him, the world would always have people looking to take advantage. His job wasn't just to provide for Mira, but to protect her heart. At home, his wife began spending more time with Mira too. Not out of duty, but genuine connection. They baked together on Sundays. Messy, flour-covered afternoons where Mira learned to roll dough and his wife laughed more than she had in years. One day he walked into the kitchen to find them sitting at the table, heads bent over a puzzle, cups of hot chocolate steaming beside them. She's teaching me chess, his wife said with a smile. I keep losing, Mira grinned. You moved your queen too early. He watched them, this woman who'd once been a stranger to his past, now helping shape his daughter's future. Something in him softened even more. Then came the hardest test. A major investor, one of the oldest in the company, called for a private meeting. Over strong coffee in a quiet corner of his office, the man said, I respect what you're doing, truly, but the board is nervous. Your focus has shifted. Profits are stable, yes, but growth has slowed. People are wondering if you're still the right leader. He didn't argue. He just said, I'm still the same person who built this company. But now I see a bigger picture. Profit isn't the only measure of success. The investor studied him for a long moment. And if we ask you to step down? Then I'll step down, he said calmly. But I won't stop doing what's right. The man leaned back, surprised. You'd walk away from all this? I already lost 20 years with my daughter, he said quietly. I won't lose another day. The investor didn't respond right away. Then slowly he nodded. Maybe that's exactly why you should stay. A week later, the board voted, unanimously, to keep him as CEO. Not because they'd changed their minds about business, but because they saw something new in him, purpose. And purpose, it turned out, was good for business too. Customers began choosing their products not just for quality, but because they believed in the values behind them. Employees stayed longer, worked harder, proud to be part of something that gave back. The foundation grew, opening more clinics, funding scholarships, even starting a program to train women as community health workers. Through it all, Mira remained grounded. She didn't brag about her father's wealth. At school, she wore the same uniform as everyone else. When a classmate asked if she lived in a palace, she just said, I live in a house, with a garden, and a dog now. They'd adopted a scruffy stray from the shelter, a scrappy terrier mix Mira named Lucky. She still kept her lucky stone in her pocket. Still read every night, still played chess with him every Friday. One evening, after a particularly tough game, she'd trapped his king with a clever pawn move. He leaned back and laughed. Where did you learn that? From watching you, she said simply. You always protect your king but forget the pawns. But pawns, they can become queens. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a child but a young woman with wisdom beyond her years. You're going to change the world, he said, Only if you help me, she replied, and in that moment he understood. This wasn't just about him being a father. It was about them building something together, a legacy not of money, but of care. Later that night, he sat on the terrace with his wife, the city lights twinkling below like stars fallen to earth. "Do you ever wonder what our life would have been like if none of this happened?" she asked. He thought about it. "I used to, but now, I can't imagine it. She's not an interruption to our life. She's the reason it finally makes sense." His wife reached for his hand. "I was scared at first. Not of her. Of losing you to guilt, to regret. But you didn't drown in it. You rose." He squeezed her fingers. "Because I had you both to hold on to." Inside the house, Mira was asleep, Lucky curled at the foot of her bed, her school bag neatly hung on the chair, her lucky stone resting on the nightstand beside a photo of her mother. Outside, the world kept turning, noisy, complicated, often unfair. But in that quiet home on the hill, something rare and beautiful had taken root. A family, stitched together not by blood alone, but by choice, by courage, and by the simple, powerful act of showing up. And that, he realized as he looked up at the stars, was worth more than all the wealth in the world. A year had passed since that rainy night at the gate. The seasons had turned, the headlines had faded, and life, real, ordinary, beautiful life, had settled into a new rhythm. The mansion still stood on the hill, grand and quiet, but it no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a home. Laughter echoed in the halls now, along with the soft thud of a dog's paws and the sound of a young voice reading aloud from a book before bed. Mira was 11 now. She'd grown taller, her shoulders straighter, her eyes brighter. She still kept her hair in neat braids, still carried her blue backpack with the embroidered star, and still kept her lucky stone in her pocket. But she no longer flinched at loud noises or hesitated before speaking her mind. She'd found her place, not because she'd been given everything, but because she'd been given something far more valuable: belonging. Her birthday fell on a warm Saturday in early spring. Not a grand affair with celebrities and cameras, but a small gathering in the garden, just family, a few close friends from school, and the women from the foundation who'd become like aunties to her. There were paper lanterns strung between the trees, homemade lemonade, and a cake shaped like a stack of books, because, as she'd told him with a grin, "I want to eat my dreams." He watched her from a distance as she helped set the tables, laughing with the dog circling her feet, her hands dusted with flour from helping bake cookies earlier. His wife stood beside him sipping tea, a quiet smile on her face. "She's happy," she said simply. "She is," he replied. "And it's not because of the house or the money. It's because she finally knows she's loved." Later, after the cake was cut and the last guest had left, Mira came to him with a serious look in her eyes. "Papa," she said, "can we go somewhere tomorrow?" "Anywhere," he said. "I want to go back. To where Mama and I lived." He didn't ask why. He just nodded. "We'll go." The next morning they drove through the city, past gleaming towers and busy markets until the roads grew narrower and the buildings closer together. The slum hadn't changed much, still crowded, still noisy, still full of life pushing through cracks in the concrete. But something was different now. Where there had once been only hardship, there was now hope. The clinic in Priya's name stood proudly at the corner of the main lane, its walls painted a cheerful yellow, children's drawings taped to the windows. A small crowd gathered as they stepped out of the car, not out of curiosity but warmth. People waved. Children called Mira's name. An elderly woman pressed a marigold into her hand. "You came back," she said, eyes shining. "I promised I would," Mira replied. They walked to the spot where her old room had been. It was gone now, torn down to make space for a new community learning center, the first project fully funded by the foundation. In its place stood a bright, airy building with large windows, shelves of books, and a small stage where children performed plays every month. Mira stood silently for a long time, then reached into her pocket and pulled out her lucky stone. She walked to the base of a young neem tree planted near the entrance and placed the stone gently at its roots. "For Mama," she whispered. He knelt beside her. "She'd be so proud of you." Mira looked up at him, eyes glistening but dry. "Do you think she knows?" "I do," he said. "Love like hers doesn't just disappear, it grows. Like this tree." They spent the rest of the morning at the center. Mira read stories to a group of younger children, her voice clear and kind. He sat in the back watching, heart full. One little boy tugged his sleeve and asked, "Is that your daughter?" "Yes," he said, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. Afterward, as they walked back to the car, Mira asked, "Will you really let me help run the foundation when I'm older?" "If you want to," he said, "but only if you promise to lead with your heart, not just your head." She thought about that. "Mama used to say the heart sees what the eyes miss." He smiled. "Then you're already ahead of most CEOs. Back home, they found his wife waiting on the porch with 2 cups of tea. She'd heard about their trip from the driver. "How was it?" she asked. "Good," Mira said. "Sad, but good." His wife reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Mira's ear. "You carry her with you. That's how she stays alive." That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, the 3 of them sat on the terrace. No titles, no roles, just a family sharing silence and the soft chirping of crickets. Lucky lay at their feet, snoring lightly. He thought about how much had changed. A year ago, he'd measured his worth in boardrooms and bank statements. Now he measured it in bedtime stories and chess games lost on purpose, in the way Mira ran to hug him when he came home. He'd restructured his company, yes, but more importantly, he'd restructured his soul. The foundation had grown beyond what anyone expected. It wasn't just clinics and schools now. It was sewing cooperatives for widows, scholarship programs for girls, even a small publishing initiative where mothers wrote children's books based on their own lives. Mira had helped name it, Priya's Light, and through it all she remained grounded. She still did her chores, still studied hard, still saved part of her allowance to buy books for the center. When a reporter once asked her what it was like to be a billionaire's daughter, she'd simply said, "I'm just Mira, and I'm lucky to have a father who finally came home." Now, as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky, Mira turned to him. "Papa," she said softly, "do you ever miss the old you? The one who didn't know me?" He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just his daughter but a reflection of everything he'd been given a second chance to become. "No," he said, "because that man was lost, and you found me." She leaned her head on his shoulder, just like she had that first week, and for a long time, they just sat there, wrapped in the quiet certainty of love that had been tested, proven and chosen again and again. Later that night, after Mira was asleep and the house was still, he stood once more at the window overlooking the garden. The same gate where she'd stood, drenched and trembling, now stood open most days, welcoming, not guarding. He thought about the journey, the fear, the doubt, the weight of truth, and the slow, steady work of rebuilding trust. He hadn't just gained a daughter. He'd rediscovered his humanity, and in doing so, he'd built something far more lasting than any empire, a legacy of compassion, passed from one generation to the next. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called. The city hummed below, unaware of the quiet miracle that had unfolded on this hill, not in grand gestures, but in small daily acts of love. He turned from the window, walked down the hall, and paused outside Mira's room. The door was slightly ajar. He peeked in. She was asleep, one hand under her pillow, the other resting on Lucky's back. On her nightstand, next to the photo of her mother, sat a new chess piece, a queen carved from smooth wood, a gift from him on her birthday. He smiled, closed the door gently, and went to bed not as a billionaire, but as a father who had finally come home. And in that simple truth he found everything he'd ever needed.